Check, check. There it goes. 1, 2.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm.
One second. You ready? I'm gonna count down. I'm gonna count you down.
Okay. Thanks, Carol.
You ready? All right, David. Ready? 5, 4, 3.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Barbara Tyron. I'm president of the Women's Council on Energy and the Environment, and I'm just absolutely thrilled to be here at CPS Energy with all of you. Thank you so much for getting up early and joining us here today for a WCEE live stream broadcast back to Washington, D.C., and wherever there is a WCEE member in this country. We are delighted that Paula Gold-Williams, the CEO of CPS Energy, is here to provide welcoming remarks. As I think everyone knows, Paula is our 2019 Champion of the Year, and we could not be more pleased to have such a stalwart champion who has been so committed to WCEE and our mission and helping us fulfill it for the last 9 months, and we look forward to her continuing championship. So, Paula?
All right. Thank you, Barbara. So here we are. Again, we are really trying to create and use technology to obviously eliminate the distance between us. We are excited. We have been trying to use live streaming for a while for internal events and also for our partnership with WCEE, which has been amazing. I can't tell you how honored I was to be recognized in terms of being a champion for women. It isn't a hobby. I understand how important it is to make sure that women have all of the support that they need and actually encourage them to have a whole lot more confidence about being able to be anything that they want. So when I got the honor for WCEE, and as I started talking to Barbara, it's just awesome for us in San Antonio to be able to be connected to Washington, D.C., and see the big, broad issues that really are an everyday part of your landscape. And in turn, we want to be able to share with you how we look at things in a very local perspective. We think global, actually, at CPS Energy, and we apply local. And we're a big convening town. And so when we had the opportunity, and Barbara talked to me about this, with NARUC coming, why not have another event where we can optimize the relationship between NARUC, WCEE, and CPS Energy? And luck would have it, we are actually having Chamber of Commerce Days here. You can't tell from the studio, but we are excited to have NARUC here, and we're excited to have this partnership. So we're going to exchange some more information from leaders here who happen to be women, who want to share perspectives, our strategy, our ideology. I look forward to listening to their conversation, and I really thank you again for tuning in and making part of this event part of your day and a great way to kick off the week. Have a great event and enjoy.
Great. Thank you so much, Paula, and thank you for your very strong and tangible commitment to WCEE. You are a well-deserved champion, and we're so appreciative. So now it is my pleasure to welcome up here two CPS people, two executives, Kathy Garcia, who is the Vice President of Government and Regulatory Affairs, and Carrie Meyer, who is Director of Federal and State Relations. And we're going to talk with them and learn more about what is involved in government relations at CPS Energy. So Kathy, Carrie, thank you so much for being here. This is an exciting time. Many of the women and men who are WCEE members are involved in government relations, and this is a unique opportunity to learn what it's like to do it here in San Antonio and specifically for CPS Energy. But first, I'd like to find out a little bit more about how you know each other and work with each other and came to know each other. So Kathy, would you like to tell us a little bit about your background first?
Sure. I got my start in this career as I was coming home for the summer. I was attending college at the University of Texas in Austin, and I came home. San Antonio is my hometown, and wanted a job, an internship for the summer. So I walked down to City Hall, and stepped inside and asked who from the city council would like a free intern. I'm willing to work for free. And that was the start of my career. I began working for City Council District 5, and I learned at that very moment the importance of caring for constituents and customers, people that you serve, and what public service is about. From there, that particular job yielded fantastic relationships, which then gave me the pathway to all the jobs I've had since. And I had a couple of jobs along the way to get where I am now at CPS. After I completed that internship, I actually interned at the Attorney General's office. I worked for a private law firm or lobby firm, and from there I came over to CPS and joined the government relations team.
Great. And how long ago was that?
I just celebrated 20 years at CPS Energy. I'm very proud of that.
Congratulations.
Thank
That's
you.
great. And Carrie, do you want to help us know you a little bit better, please?
Sure. So I went to college at Southwestern University in Georgetown, and I actually started there as a math major and a chemistry minor. I was going to be a math professor. And then I took a class on political ethics my freshman year in college, and I was hooked, mainly because I learned I can argue and have debates and get grades for it. So let's do it. And that is what led me into political science. I was, at the time I was graduating or thinking about graduation, I was actually going to go teach English in Spain. But I took an internship at the state capitol to get that experience, and I was hooked and always learned that, and I learned myself that when you walk into the state capitol, either you love it or you hate it, and you know it instantly, and you're either going to be there forever or never want to go back. So I started there as an intern and was offered a position when I graduated. I stayed with that. It was in the Texas House, and I was with that member for about 3 years, handling a number of administrative and legislative issues, and that's where I met my next boss. They were on a select committee on energy and environmental issues, and that's where I first learned that I was really interested in that area, that policy area. And I then took a job with the then state representative, and 4 months later he became Speaker of the House. And so that took me on a different path than I was expecting, but loved the 6+ years that I stayed with him. And actually, when I first started with him, he's from San Antonio. And so in September of 2008, I'm sitting in my office, and someone walks in and introduces herself
I was doing my job.
as Kathy Garcia from CPS Energy, and wanted to introduce me to the utility and public power in Texas. And so that's how Kathy and I met. And about the same time that I was realizing this was a policy area I really wanted to get into, and spent 6 years with the Speaker's office doing a number of things, but ultimately knowing someday I wanted to come back into this area. And at that point, a position had opened up that I applied for. And I've only been at CPS for 5 years, not 20, but working my way there.
But it's interestingly enough, too, when you meet somebody and you do the work that we do in the policy arena, and you educate, you share information about our utility, about our mission, our initiatives, and we build enabling partnerships across our paths. And that was one that we created with Carrie and members over at the legislature. So it was a nice connection early on, and it's carried forward in many ways.
That's terrific. And Carrie, that relationship that you talked about with the state capitol, the love it or hate it, inside the Beltway we call that Potomac fever. So it sounds like it's alive and well here too. You
Yes.
know it when you know.
Yes, it's not uncommon to have a drawer in your office that is filled with essentials just in case you end up sleeping there or forgetting the last time you went home was. So yeah.
Good. Well, thank you very much. So, Kathy, you've got a number of responsibilities. You have responsibility for local government relations, for federal and state relations, and then for energy market policy. Can you talk a little bit about how you cover all of that and how your team is organized?
Sure. Well, the way we cover it is with really wonderful teammates. The Energy Market Policy Unit is a unit that is responsible for understanding the ERCOT stakeholder process. And ERCOT is the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. And as much as they monitor the way that electricity is flowing in our state or on our grid, there's also an internal policy-making process. And so we have individuals who understand how what we call rules or protocols are developed, and how those go from a starting committee up through a variety of the stakeholder process all the way up to the ERCOT board. And so we have people on our team that are looking out for how CPS Energy can be effective in the market and how we can create protocols that are helpful to the things we're trying to do for our customers. And we also mitigate risk that way. We also have the local government relations team. We have a wonderful team here situated in San Antonio that has a wide purview of responsibility. Interestingly, their key focus is our regulator, which is our San Antonio City Council. But we also have 31 suburban cities, so 31 other city councils that are in our service territory where relationships do matter. We also have the Bexar County Commissioners Court, so officials that represent Bexar County. And then we also, in that unit, are responsible for our Citizens Advisory Council, which is made up of 15 individuals that are from the public. 10 are appointed by City Council, 5 are at large. And they offer us an opportunity to have two-way dialogue. So receiving, we share information about our initiatives and policies with them, and they in turn ask us very challenging questions to help us be the best utility we can be. And then also we have the State and Federal Relations Unit, which is what Carrie oversees, and I'll let her speak to that just a little bit.
Sure, thank you. So our federal and state relations team handles all of the utilities interface at the state government level and the federal government level. That includes our state legislature. We have 10 members of the Texas House and 4 members of the Texas Senate that represent part of our service territory, or all of our service territory combined. And then at the federal level, we have 5 congressional members, and then of course our 2 U.S. senators. So my team is responsible for interfacing with them on a daily basis, as well as other legislative leaders in Congress and state legislature that impact areas important to CPS Energy and our customers and our employees. And then in addition to that is our state and federal regulatory bodies that we work with. For example, the Public Utility Commission or Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. We are tracking those meetings, we're attending those meetings, looking for opportunities to engage in their proceedings, and then also our interface with our state and federal trade associations, like APPA or LPPC or the local level TPPA, just to name a few. We will manage those relationships too.
Great, thank you very much. And I should recognize that we do have an APPA executive here with us in the room, so delighted to have that participation here today. And that also reminds me, speaking of people in the room, that questions from all of you are most welcome, so please feel free. We've got a mic. Please feel free to ask a question at any time during our discussion here. And for those who are part of the live stream, you can also add your questions in and they can be read here. So please do feel free to send them in writing, and we'll be pleased to speak to them here as well. So this is meant to be an interactive discussion, not just a one-way or two-way. So I'll go with the next question, which is, can you talk about what your quote-unquote average day is in CPS Energy's government relations?
Is there any such thing as an average day
Yes,
in any of our work environments? No, I think with government relations, you can set your course the night before for the day ahead, and you can assume that you are going to accomplish those things that you've put down on your list to attempt to work on. And really what the nature of our job is a bit reactionary. We are going to receive inquiries or calls or questions that come in from anybody in the policy arena or the public, and we quickly pivot in order to answer, to respond, to be someone that is a trusted resource for whatever the need is. So a lot of what we do is monitoring and engaging of activities, but it's also a lot about educating and sharing information about our utility. It's also looking for ways that we can find partnerships with people, with organizations, with other companies in the community in order to really work together to accomplish the things that all entities would like to do. We are here to provide electric and natural gas, but we're also here as the community. We are the customers. We care just as much too. And so looking for ways that we can partner is really how we focus. And from day to day, that might never be the same.
I think it's one of my favorite things is that no 2 days are alike, and you can walk in and have your cute little to-do list that's never going to be touched because new things happen, but that's part of what I enjoy is walking in and not knowing what are today's challenges going to be. As Kathy said, pivoting to new things. For us, that means we're educating on new things, but we're also learning new things ourselves. And that, for me, is one of the, I enjoy that no 2 days are alike.
You know, I might also add to that too, that we wake up every morning and we turn the news on and we read the newspaper, and there's things that happen the day before or overnight that when you get up the next morning, all of a sudden create your path for that day. So very much about what we do is current affairs and staying informed and being able to respond and to find ways that we can assist with whatever may be occurring.
I'm involved in government relations as well and have been throughout my professional career. And one of the phrases that I like to use, which you've both summarized beautifully, is it's endlessly fascinating. And it's just what you said. Every day you do wake up. There was a longtime chairman of the House Energy Committee, John Dingell, who served for a number of decades, actually, in Congress. And he said that what prompted him when he got up in the mornings was to go for the snake that was closest to him. Oh. So that's another way to characterize the work as well. But thank you very much. That's very helpful to hear. Can I ask you, is there ever an off season? Of course, I just referenced Congress. Congress goes in and out of session. Is there ever a time when the state legislature is out, Congress is out, and you're out?
Maybe the holiday, and that lasts for a day or two. But no, with the state legislature specifically, they are only in session for 140 days every other year. But that doesn't mean that when Memorial Day of an odd-numbered year rolls around, they go home and it's over. There is a lot of work that they do outside of a session, whether it's implementing legislation that passed during a previous session or going through the interim charge process, which is the process by which they study topics and issues in preparation for the next session. So they might not be debating and passing legislation, but they're holding meetings, they're having hearings that are paving the way for future legislation that we need to make sure that we're on top of and participating in. You also have it's kind of an ebb and a flow of when the legislature's out, then the regulatory agencies really pick up. And so we might not be in the Pink Dome, but we might be across the street at the Public Utility Commission or the Railroad Commission, because now those agencies are taking, say, legislation that passed this previous session and implementing that, having rulemakings, or they're themselves identifying issues and priorities for the next session. So I'd like to hope that someday there's an off season, but there's not. But that is one of the things that we love too, though, is just always something new and different.
Barbara, I would add to that when the legislature is in session, it's a fast and furious time. And when they are out of session, we get this question quite a bit is, well, if they're not in, then what are you really doing during that time when they're not meeting? And that is a really critical time for us. That is the time when we actually can meet and sit down and take an unrushed and unhurried time to visit, to talk, to get to know one another, and to share information with each other. It's our opportunity not only to talk work, but just to get to know people and having relationships. I think it's true for most of us. When we like somebody, we want to work with them. And so it just takes time. And the time when they are not pulled in multiple directions allows us to share with them not just words, but also allow them to come see our facilities, to come look at what we do in the field, what our employees are doing, how our customer service reps work, how do we make power, how do we send that power out to people. And so there's really nothing like hands-on learning. And we have a very active number of legislative, both local, state, and federal, that really like to learn about this and understand it. And so when we are in an interim period, or maybe when Congress is home for a work session, that is our time to show and tell. And when they go back into session, that by that time, you already have to have those relationships in place so that when you do walk into their office with either a proposal that you'd like to see passed or a concern that you have about something that's headed in a way that you feel might be negative to us or to our customers, they already understand where you're coming from. So when they're not in, it's a very, very critical time for us to do really good work.
Thank you very much. So we've talked about those relationships and how important they are, and I think that's true whether people are involved in government relations in Washington or any state capital around the country in all 50 states. Can you talk a little bit about your relationships, CPS's relationships with the other utilities in the state of Texas?
Sure. So we have a wonderful network across other utilities, both electric and natural gas, across the state and across the nation. We know our counterparts at other companies here in Texas. We know them through our different trade associations. We know counterparts, and we're able to connect CEOs with CEOs, COOs with COOs. And for Carrie and I, it's very important to know our government relations counterparts. You can find synergies there by talking with one another. You also can learn best practices from one another. When you have a question about a program, it gives you a pool of like-minded businesses or like-operated businesses to go and learn from and learn how they've done things. And then vice versa. We find that a lot of people, a lot of other entities will come to us and ask us for questions on how we do things and how we roll out certain programs. So it helps in advocacy, but it also helps in overall business operations.
Anything you'd like to add, Carrie?
I think you said it perfectly well. I have nothing to add.
Good, thank you. So we talked about APPA and the fact that we have APPA actually represented here in the room today and how important that relationship is for you. Can you talk a little bit about the gas associations? There's, of course, convergence between electricity and gas, but there's also distinctions, and I'd love to explore that a little bit with you now.
Sure. So I'll sort of set a broad stage, and Kathy can speak to more specifics. But with all of our trade associations, but also our gas, it's on a day-to-day basis receiving communications back and forth about items or legislative activities of impact or interest, finding opportunities for us to keep our folks here at CPS Energy engaged. And then it's also their committees, their task forces, finding ways that we can routinely be involved, have members serve on those task forces and committees to further enhance our participation there. But I'll defer to Kathy on some of our specific work with our gas associations.
Sure. The associations that we are members of, on the gas side specifically, are the American Public Gas Association and also the American Gas Association, which I believe is a sponsor of NARUC's event here in San Antonio. Associations provide all sorts of benefits to its members. For us on the government relations side, real-time information is critical. We can't be all places at all times, particularly when that activity is happening in Washington, D.C. So our trade associations are able to cover that activity, to come back and immediately report out on it, and help us understand what's happening, the pulse of activity, and the speed at which it might be happening. In terms of networking, they offer wonderful opportunities to meet and work with different companies across the country. And again, as I mentioned, it helps us with our government relations counterparts. They also offer training components. And so as much as it's important for us to understand policy and issues, our trade associations also offer opportunities for learning and professional growth in terms of leadership and also technical skill.
Great, thank you very much. And I might remind those who are participating via webcast, some of you may actually in the webcast be members of these associations, maybe with a trade association or another entity back in Washington that interacts with CPS Energy. Please do feel free to submit questions in writing, and we can speak to those here. And also, again, if anybody, I'll pause, if anybody in the room has a question, this would be a great chance. Yes, please. We need to get I guess, a microphone. Do we have a, thank you, Andrea.
Good morning, thank you. I thought it might be good to maybe give some specific examples of how your teams work with the operational areas of the company? Some of the things that impact us specifically, like the pole attachments, or just
Great question.
So I'll start with talk a little bit about our state legislature. When they are leading up to session through session, we have a robust process by which we analyze and engage on state legislative proposals. There's actually a member of my team that goes through every single bill that's filed, and this past session it was about 7,000. And so what our team does is we have a program, we have a process where we find a piece of legislation that either we know for sure has an impact or maybe we think it does, but we need more expert opinions on what those impacts may be. So then we take the bill, and we have a number of operational and legal subject matter experts within the utility that we then share that proposal with and ask a series of questions. Is there an impact? Is it positive, neutral, negative impact? What would be can you give us details on what the impact would be to CPS Energy? We also look at proposals that may not have a direct impact on us, but may have an impact on our larger community. But our legal and operational experts help us really hone in on what that specific impact is, and then that helps us with talking points to go back to the legislature, because that at the end of the day, you're only as good as your word, and you need to have sound data and information when you go and you speak to someone. So they help us really make sure we have the right talking points, we have the key information to go in and say, this is a bill that we really love because it could do this, this, or this is a bill that could be detrimental to CPS Energy for these reasons. And that's just on the state legislative side. We have a similar process on the regulatory side. When a rulemaking is proposed, the process by which we share it internally and ask for input and feedback, and then help with writing talking points. And then we also have white papers in our public policy agenda that we maintain on a regular basis that has our broad positions on larger umbrella issues that our subject matter experts help us identify what those issues are and help us identify where our positioning should be.
I think I'll add to that too. So much of the issues that we deal with are very technical in nature. And so from a government relations perspective, we have to do this deep dive and learn and understand it, not at the subject matter expert level, but enough to really understand and be able to articulate. And then we also have the cross-collaborative work of taking that very technical information and turning it into talking points that are well understood by whatever general audience you may have. And that's a real skill set in itself, to be able to take a complex issue and narrow it down to just as you say, the 15-second elevator pitch that you need to get a point across. How can you do that succinctly? And something else that I think we do at CPS Energy that's very helpful to the overall cause, and that is not only do we have proposals reviewed and work with a variety of units, but we also hold internal meetings where we bring business units together. And not only do we report out on things that are happening, rulemakings or legislative proposals or local ordinances, but we really work to integrate that. And what I mean by that is we don't just discuss with one-way reporting. We really look for dialogue across the organization so that we can understand, does this have a financial impact that we need to budget for going forward? Does this have an IET, a technical aspect in terms of technology that we either need to plan for or do some programming for? So we try to ask some challenging questions to make sure we're not just sharing information, but we're actually helping business units integrate that into their thought process and their planning.
That was a great question. Thank you very much. And it sounds like there's a lot of coordination and communication that needs to happen across the company in order to achieve these objectives. How does one get started learning about all the technical information you just referenced, Kathy?
Oh, wow.
Just step right in and sit down and roll your sleeves up. When I came to CPS Energy, I was not informed on electricity or natural gas. I knew a lot about how policies were made in different arenas, but I was not informed at all on electricity. And you have to ask questions. You have to allow time to learn. You have to take time to read and to talk to others. And you have to do that rather quickly. Government relations really has to focus more on policy process, but you also really do need to have an understanding, and it's one of the units that covers the span. We have to know operations, we have to know financial impacts and how the finance and accounting departments work together. We have to know how our fleet operates. So it's knowing a little bit about a lot, but it really is sitting down, rolling up your sleeves, and asking questions and attempting to learn and to process.
I'd say this is another example where relationships are key because you're never going to know everything. I've tried. But it's about knowing the people that you can go ask the questions to, the people that you can, that you've built trust and relationships with, where when you do have a question, you can go see them. Or, you know, you're going to become your own subject matter expert in whatever it may be, but knowing the right people that you can lean on to learn from and ask those questions to have those conversations with, that's just, I would say, another key point of having the relationships is to help you learn things that you may not think you'll ever be able to learn.
Good, thank you very much. Any other questions? Annie, is there one coming in live stream?
Yes, we do have one question. Great to hear about your roles as government relations professionals. In your opinion, what is the most critical skill or skills you need to work in positions such as yours?
Excellent question.
I would say it's having an open mind and open communication, because even though with our role we are out advocating on behalf of CPS Energy, the relationships are always two ways. So it's having the ability to have open and honest conversations with folks, whether you're discussing an issue you agree on or you're discussing an item that you disagree on. It's being able to come in and have an open and honest conversation and learn about someone else's perspective or someone else's point of view and helping them understand your own. And at the end of the day, you may not come to an agreement, but at least you've been able to have a productive conversation.
I would add to that enthusiasm. I think that if you're enthusiastic about what you do and you show enthusiasm for others that you're speaking with and that you're learning from or that you're working to advocate with, that just innately and instinctively builds a partnership. So if you could take a little bit of time to just find that authentic approach, show that you care, say that you care, and show your enthusiasm for what you're doing and what you're working on, I believe that will help with your effectiveness.
This is a personal question from me. So I'm not currently a lobbyist, but I have been one in the past. And a word I'd like to offer and get your thoughts around is integrity. So when I was a lobbyist for a utility company, what I sometimes would do when I was talking to the congressman or his or her staff would be, I'd be asked, well, what would the opposing side say if they were here in the room with us today? And I always thought that was actually a very nice compliment to be able to feel that you could give both sides equally, and yet you also, because you were there advocating for, in this case, the utility, you could also do the rebuttal around the other side and what they would say. I'd love your thoughts around that.
My college advisor, actually, that was something that we learned from a very early age. Freshman year was you can't ever really know your side unless you know the other side. And he would routinely play devil's advocate with us, or if he knew how you felt on a certain topic or issue, he would make you write a paper, argue the opposite. And so that was something that's been, I think that's a great thing to have in mind when you walk into any office or communicate on it with anyone, is what would the other side say? And that was something that for me was taught very early.
Barbara, I agree as well. The integrity piece matters a great deal. You have to be at that trusted resource. People have to know that what you're saying is credible, is accurate. And when you do come in and you have an ask or you're advocating a particular position, policymakers will ask you who might see this differently and why. And it is our job to understand the different perspectives and to speak with honesty about why someone or some entity might feel differently. And particularly policymakers have a responsibility to sort that out. They're there to represent a wide array of interests and trying to do what they feel is in the best interest for a variety of reasons that maybe we're not always privy to. But having an understanding of different perspectives and being able to speak to that just enhances the credibility, and it also creates a likelihood that that particular policymaker will come back to you and ask more questions, knowing that they can trust you in that way.
Good, thank you both. Yes, these issues can sometimes be very complex, and it's not immediately apparent what the right answer is. I think we had another question in the room. Yes, please, Delia Patterson from APPA.
Thank you. This has been a really interesting discussion. I just wanted to follow up on the operational and GR, government relations connection, and how you put that together with your skill set and your ability to advocate and your integrity. And if you could just, either one of you, Kathy or Carrie, just talk about a success or a win that you're proud of that has resulted from putting that all together.
We just had a really great successful win at our Texas legislature. I'm going to let Carrie talk about that one.
Hey, this was something I was very, very excited about, and so excited that we were able to pass this. But we worked on a bill this past session that has now added utility vehicles to the state's Move Over, Slowdown Law. And under that law, which previously only applied to tow trucks, emergency vehicles, and law enforcement, states that if you are approaching a vehicle parked on the side of the road, you need to either slow down reduce your speed by 20 miles per hour or vacate the lane. And during Hurricane Harvey recovery efforts 2 years ago, we had some very serious public safety incidents involving our crews on the side of the road and drivers not paying attention. And our CEO, Paula, had identified this as an item that we needed to take to the legislature and go speak to our leaders about what we could do in the 2019 session. And we were at an interim hearing where we brought that recommendation forward. That was in November of 2017, almost a little over 2 years ago. And the committee picked up on it and they included it as a legislative recommendation. And then we worked with our counterparts across the San Antonio community, but then also other associations, other utilities, a whole conglomeration of what we've been talking about. Other utilities, other companies that have contractor vehicles or utility vehicles to come to a great comprehensive proposal to add these utility vehicles. And we addressed concerns having to do with what type of lighting they should or should not have, what kind of flexibility will utilities have to ensure their vehicles are covered. And we successfully navigated through all of that and was one of the first 30 bills to get to the governor and get his signature, which I was very proud of. And it went into effect on September 1. But that, for us, it came from our CEO, but it was something that we were able to go and speak to other counterparts and leaders about and got this broad base of support across the state and really see that one through. And I think I made it through that without any vehicle-related puns, so I appreciate you letting me do that.
That is a really concrete example of how government relations had to understand a safety issue. And when you think about the safety issue, you have to then think about the types of trucks that are on the road and how a police officer or a law enforcement officer can actually enforce that. And so it is simplistic and yet very complex. And we spent a lot of time working with our operations side of the business, our fleet, understanding what makes the utility truck, what are the descriptions around that. Most people can identify simply a bucket truck, one that's up with an elevated bucket in the air, but we have natural gas crews working. We have folks working on underground equipment. So we really had to dive across multiple organizations to understand the technicalities to then bring it back up in order to create a policy that policymakers could feel comfortable passing and enforcing. But that's a good example of how we had to work in many ways.
We had interesting conversations about different colors of lights, even identifying, even having the discussions of how do you define a utility. If you're going to add this coverage to utility vehicles in state law, how do you define utility for the purposes of state code?
We also had to learn about other utility vehicles. So it's not just our own. If we're going to create a state law, we have to understand what other utilities have and what lights are white, amber, blue. It's really, it's been a fascinating exercise, but it summarizes a lot of not just working internally and across your business units, but also across other entities operationally, as well as the government relations counterparts. So really a lot of cross-collaboration work there.
Good. Well, congratulations on that success. That's
Very
tremendous.
excited. And we had great support internally and externally to get this through, so thank you.
That's great. That's a wonderful win. I believe we have another question here from Paula Gold-Williams.
All right, I couldn't resist. So look, Barbara, Carrie, Kathy, you all are sitting up there. You look awesome, and you're extremely professional. I've been impressed with all of you in the various capacities that you have, but I'm gonna mix it up a little bit. So it does sound great when you can like make order, and you have lists and you're working processes and you're coming up with the goodness. And of course, I am totally proud of the work in particular that you all led us in the legislature. It was an idea of mine and a passion. But let's be real, right? In reality, to me, as I watch you all, lead these really complex issues, it ain't easy. And what I want to make sure that the audience gets today is, my typical term is we have a ton of challenges that we try to flip into opportunities. But give them a sense, like some of this stuff is just really hard. And you feel like, people are trying to change the industry so much. There's no collaboration. I mean, you're really having to do some really hard things, putting things on the forefront. So give them a sense of like how difficult it is. In your terms, Kathy, you use terms like, you're very kind and you'll say, well, we'd like to be a resource for you, which means, can you let me talk to you for a little bit because this is cray-cray? So talk a little bit about that hard balance between tough agendas and trying to create order out of it.
So this is a messy business, and it is full of intensity and it is full of stress. It's wonderful when you can have those accomplishments, but in reality, a lot of what we're doing is mitigating risk in a very behind-the-scenes way. There are a lot of policymakers are looking for ways to create policy, and that policy may have some very not as favorable effects. And sometimes the pressure that comes from policymakers that are appointed or elected, their philosophies, their ideologies become that priority. And it may or may not be what's entirely feasible for industry to do. And so we can spend time educating and sharing, but we don't always win. And sometimes that carries with it a great deal of stress. You can do the best that you can to communicate and to share why something may not be a good idea. But oftentimes the agendas that are carried by others are going to win out. And that's a hard message to bring back, is we're trying, but we're not being successful here, and we're going to have to find some other ways to address it. Perseverance matters.
Anything else you want to add, Carrie?
I would just say that we, one of the things that we see often is leaders that want to pass a proposal because of an issue that maybe happened somewhere else in the state, or because of some specific entity that has had an issue. And in terms of a legislative proposal that ends up becoming something that unintentionally impacts systems like CPS Energy. And so we try as best we can to show them the unintentional impacts. And sometimes, we have to lean on our subject matter experts to give us the specific information, but Kathy's right. Sometimes we are able to help affect change, and when we do have those conversations, we also try to come in with a solution, not just saying this is a problem, but we can say here's how we would like to work with you. Here's a proposal that we'd like to put forward to help maybe mitigate those concerns or those unintended consequences. And sometimes we're successful and sometimes we're not, and that really is, when you're very passionate about your job like we are, that it can make things difficult and stressful, but we get up the next morning and we take another crack at it.
There is that surprise element that you, like I mentioned earlier, you wake up, you read the news, and you're trying to be reactive to things that may have happened. But there are times when policymakers or other entities are intentionally not going to tell you something, and then you have to figure out, did we have a breakdown here? Why weren't we informed of this earlier? What could we have done differently to stay ahead of that curve? And that's just part of the strategy. And other entities may find success at times by being able to do that. But we try really hard to stay ahead of that. But again, it's not always the case. So Paul, I think that's a really great question, and it is worth us discussing that there are very challenging times in the job that we do.
I might add also that I think that the times have changed. I'll be speaking from the DC perspective on this, but I recently was in a briefing with the chairman of the Senate Energy Committee, Lisa Murkowski, who's been in Congress for a while and succeeded her father, actually. And she's very thoughtful and has worked in a bipartisan manner with the ranking member, Senator Manchin. But amazingly, first of all, we had a 35-day federal government shutdown at the beginning of this year. Many of you may remember that. But she pulled together a legislative package during that time, and as soon as the government was back in place, passed it successfully through the Senate, through the House, by resounding margins, and then it was signed by the president. And some of the newer members of Congress came to her and said, well, how did you do that? And especially during a government shutdown, how did you pull a package together? And she said, well, a number of bills had been introduced. We put the package together knowing who would be supportive of each, and so that it was a package that had an appeal for the majority, obviously, of the Senate and the House and the executive branch. She goes, that's what we call regular order. And that's what used to prevail in Washington. And we're into different times now with different communication tools, different ways of doing the processes, and that's continuing to evolve. And so I think that I would offer, I think that means new challenges and new ways of learning how to do government relations at any level of government. Any thoughts around that?
Social media certainly has sped up the sharing of information, and it's almost as if at times you can't absorb it all fast enough. So when the legislature is in or when Congress is meeting, the Twitter feeds are incredibly active, and you can actually pick up information there or insight from policymakers much faster there than you can by just walking down a hallway. So I do believe that social media and the speed at which news is shared has really changed the dynamics of how we operate. It's a new dynamic.
I'll say to a broader sense, just technology in general. When everything used to be a paper-based process, and when the thought of a bill becoming a law is actually a piece of paper that's moving through the process, or hearings weren't live streamed or meetings weren't live streamed, you had to be there, otherwise you were going to miss it. I would say just technology in general has completely changed it. Now you can live stream 10 different hearings at once while trying to watch Twitter, and then seeing that amendments that are being considered are in real time being uploaded, and then you have the news that's commenting on what's happening on the live stream event at the same time. It's really, it makes things move faster. It means information, any type of information, whether it's credible or not, is moving much faster, and you just have to feel like your head's kind of in 10 different places at once, trying to keep track of it all, and also being proactively engaging at the same time.
Great, thank you. Another question in the room. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
My question is, with all this stress and this speed of information, how do you keep yourself centered? How do you deal with the stress and stay focused knowing that you still have work to do?
Carrie has these squeeze balls in her office, and
I
she
collect
comes in and
random-
throws them at me, and we sit there and talk through it while we're working out our stress through those gadgets. No, it's a great question. I think having a team that you can share and talk with and strategize with is a great outlet. Your team, and depending on your team, and soundboarding and vetting becomes an incredibly important asset. And it's okay to vet and to vent and to say, this is really frustrating. What are we going to do about this? On a side note, a personal note, the other thing I think that is so important is just carving out a little bit of time when you can for exercise. And just making sure in some form or fashion you do step away temporarily from your day. You can't do it every day, but making sure that your brain is being placed in some other environment for a short period of time so that when you do re-enter your work environment, you can feel a bit more refreshed.
I'd second the exercise thing, and I do collect random stress balls in all different shapes and sizes, and I do have a shelf in my office that Kathy and I share sometimes. But for me, with the stepping away, and it's exercise, or it's my husband and I have 2 dogs, and so it's taking them out, or but it's really when you do step away and when you can come back, I think it really is helpful for me in reprioritizing, because when you're in the middle of it and everything's coming at you at once, it's easy to lose perspective of what are the highest priorities, what are the things I can actually do something about, and what are the things that at the end of the day I can't do anything about. So if I can find a way to step away, I love sitting on a couch watching mindless TV. That's really terrible, but it lets my mind shut off, and then I can come back and say, okay, you were bogged down in this many things, but at the end of the day, these are the 3 things that are really the priority that you really can make an impact on, and these other ones just have to move to the side for the day, because what is it? If everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So learning those things, but yeah.
Thank you for that question. I would also vouch for the exercise as a very healthy way to release stress. And I also would like to give a plug to Amari Weymouth, who's with us here. She's co-founded an organization called I Empower, and I had the privilege of attending their event on Saturday morning, and that is an incredibly restorative life energy community. So congratulations, Mari, on just a wonderful organization. So we have a few minutes left. Annie, any questions from Washington at this time? Yeah. Okay, good. Well, it may not be apparent to everybody on the webcast or in the room for that matter that the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, who meet 3 times a year, are here at the Grand Hyatt in San Antonio for their annual convention. And that started actually on Friday and will go through Wednesday of this week. And we at WCEE are very grateful to NARUC, as it's called, because they give us, as a way of exchange and support, 3 tickets to their meetings, to their conferences, so that WCEE members can attend and have complimentary registration. And we're very appreciative of that. And in keeping with that appreciation, we also appreciate our relationship with CPS so much, and all of the incredible support that you all have provided and Paula has provided to WCEE over the last several months. I'm aware that there are going to be 3 CPS Energy employees using those WCEE complimentary registrations at NARUC. Can you talk about what your aspirations are for NARUC from a CPS perspective?
Sure. So I'm actually one of the attendees, one of the 3, so I'm looking forward to being there. But we have a great presence from Texas this year at the NARUC conference, and so those of us that are going to be attending work in areas that interface with our state regulatory entities. PUC, Railroad Commission, PUC, Public Utility Commission here in Texas, the Railroad Commission, and our Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. They have representation here, and so those of us who are attending are in our business units would be interfacing with those agencies, and it's great for them to be here in San Antonio as opposed to us being in Austin to see them in their offices.
in Texas, the Railroad Commission regulates the natural gas industry. So for those that aren't maybe from Texas, that's why we mention the Railroad Commission. It's kind of a strange tie, but it dates back far back in history. Yes.
Good, thank you. Well, we want to make sure that that value proposition is robust between CPS and WCEE and NARUC as well. So final question, unless there's none from the webcast, okay. If you had one wish that you would like to see fulfilled in the government relations arena for CPS Energy, what would that be?
I would say just in a general basis, across the board, I would love for people to be more civically engaged. And it's whether it's local, city council, state, federal, there are decision makers that are making decisions, taking action on things every day that impact your personal life, your community. And so I would love for people to get more involved and more knowledgeable, because there really are things that you can do to impact change, even if you're not in a government relations world. That would be my thing.
Barbara, I think when we think about government relations, we tend to think about policies and issues. And if I had a wish, it would be that when we think about government relations, we also add on the relationship part. We've talked a lot today about the importance of relationships and how they can make government relations effective. And your message is important, but so is your messenger. And so making sure that when you think about government relations, you don't just think about it as one component of policies and issues and advocating, but you think about just an equally as important component, which is making sure you have people that are rightfully fit, that are communicating and sharing the message. So I think it's both components, and thinking about it that way will make government relations professionals more effective.
Good, thank you very much. So I'd like to thank the WCEE members who were able to join us by webcast. This is another iteration of WCEE on the Road, which we launched this year. I'm very proud of that effort. And so thank you all for participating by webcast. We've been in San Antonio before, and it's just a treat to be back here and broadcasting live back to Washington, D.C. So thank you, WCEE. And I'd also like to, of course, thank Kathy and Carrie for your very thoughtful comments here today. Thank you for joining us and being a part of the WCEE CPS value proposition. And let's all join in thanking them for a fabulous discussion.